Well, happy Holy Wednesday to you. As always, hope you're having an absolutely awesome day. I'm particularly excited about the passage today because it really is very relatable for those that are serving in ministry. And I'm not talking just occupationally, although that's included, but I mean those who are really just getting in it and serving the local church, because this passage we're going to read is about the one out of the 12, Judas, who betrayed Jesus. And so let's go ahead and just dive into the main passage, and then we're going to give some couple passages around it to help give some supporting context. So in Matthew chapter 26, verse 14 through 16, then one of the 12, whose name was Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What will you give me if I deliver him over to you?" And they paid him 30 pieces of silver. And from that moment, he sought an opportunity to betray him. And there's so many interesting things in here. And so just to pick out a couple of them. One, Judas went to the chief priests, not the other way around. So it was Judas who initiated this moment to take place. A second reality in here is when they gave him 30 pieces of silver, that wasn't a ton of money. It was a good chunk of change, but we're talking, anywhere from 6 weeks to 3 months of salary. And so not much that's going to affect you long term. It's a short amount of money or a small amount of money relative to what a person would make in a year. And so the question I want to ask is, why Judas, who was one of Jesus' 12 best friends? He'd been in the ministry. He'd seen the miracles. Why would somebody like that go and approach the priests and also turn Jesus over for such a small amount of money? I mean, if we were talking millions and millions of dollars, okay, I could see maybe Judas was being really greedy in that way, but it's not all that much money. So why did he do this? And we get a little peek at why he did that in the verses that go right before it. Now, let me revisit a concept we talked about a couple days ago. The book of Matthew is, completely inspired by God. It's perfect without error. But when Matthew penned it under the authority of the Holy Spirit, it was not in perfect chronology. It was not hour by hour, minute by minute from start to finish. He would take different moments and he would group them together if they went together to create a story that flowed a little bit better. And so this passage we're about to read just before Judas agrees to betray Jesus is actually about a week beforehand. It looks like it was right beforehand, but it's actually about a week beforehand. So let's pick it up in Matthew 26, verse 6. We're about 8 verses before where we just were. Verse 6. Now when Jesus was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, a woman came up to him with an alabaster flask of very expensive ointment, and she poured it on his head as he reclined at table. And when the disciples saw it, they were indignant, saying, "Why this waste? For this could have been sold for a large sum and given to the poor." And in this passage, in the book of Matthew, it doesn't say who it is, but if you were to go to John chapter 12, you would see that the person who was leading the charge of being indignant was Judas. And so before Judas even approaches the chief priests, a week beforehand, Judas is already getting frustrated in the ministry. Jesus is the perfect leader. He is the perfect example. Ministry was extremely fruitful because God himself was doing it. But even in the midst of a perfect ministry, there still is room for us to get frustrated when we're looking at the wrong things. And the reality is that if Judas, who was one of Jesus's top 12 people, if he can betray Jesus, how much more likely is it for somebody like me to betray Jesus? Or let's flip it, and how much more likely is it for somebody like you to betray Jesus? And so my question for myself, and I think a good question for you, is, are you getting frustrated with the rhythms and the patterns of ministry that you're in to the point where you're going to betray Jesus? Or are you going to press pause and do a little heart check and say, okay, I'm still in line right now. I'm still in a great relationship with Jesus. I'm still in love with him as he was my first love. I still get joy from it. I'm still being empowered through it. Are you having those victorious mindsets and victorious moments? Or are you starting to let frustration creep into your life. And if that takes place, it can begin to take root, and you might find yourself like one of the 12 whose name was Judas, who betrayed Jesus. And I know for me, at the end of the day, I don't want to be like him. I want to be like the other 11.